and talk about one of my favorite things to chat about, which is this myth that I often see on the internet that if you're going to do baby self-feeding or baby-led weaning, etc., that you should skip purees. I want to talk about that. First of all, if you want to skip purees, or if any of the clients that I work with say, I don't want to do purees, I try to let them know why it might be a good idea. But if you're absolutely set against it, it's okay. It's just that purees do have a purpose, and that's what I want to talk to you about tonight to make sure that you understand the bigger picture about the pros and cons of purees. So we're going to chat about just one of the reasons we want to include purees, along with Safe Start handheld solids for baby self-feeding. Again, purees have a purpose. When I hear proponents of baby-led weaning say that they want to skip purees because with a puree, this is how I always hear it, babies learn to swallow first and then chew. They say that with baby-led weaning, when we skip purees, the babies learn to chew first and swallowing comes later. The idea that I hear all the time is that until a baby learns to swallow, she'll chew on her food and she'll either spit it out or gag until she gets it down her throat. It's just that from somebody who specializes in pediatric swallowing, this is really a very oversimplified way of describing the oral mechanics that kids really need to learn to eat. So I just want to walk you through this concept real quickly today before we get to questions. Typically, developing babies swallow breast milk or formula reflexively at first in order to learn to swallow intentionally, in order to learn to swallow purposefully and not due to reflexes. You see, babies learn from these reflexes that they have how to do motor movements on their own. So when a baby begins to self-feed, it's not that they learn to chew first and then swallow. That's not actually accurate. It's that they don't know how to propel anything in the first place other than liquids, and they haven't yet had the practice with thicker foods. So when you introduce purees, which are essentially a thickened liquid, it's the first step to learning to intentionally swallow soft foods in a very safe and comfortable manner. That's the key here. We want introducing foods to be safe and comfortable for kids. A little bit of gagging is fine, but frequent gagging will create negative associations with food. And the beautiful thing about purees is they tend not to cause as much gagging. Now, if your child is sensitive to certain textures, that's different. They might need a little bit of feeding therapy to help them overcome and desensitize their oral cavity. You know, this is really something that professionals have known forever. I mean, this is something I learned back in graduate school, and when the concept of baby-led weaning, which I love so much of it. You can read my article that I wrote for the American Speech Language Hearing Association about the pros and cons of baby-led weaning. When that method first came about, one of my biggest concerns was how often parents were just skipping purees. And part of that had to do because they wanted to skip the spoon. There's this idea here that if you introduce a spoon to a baby, that it's just too easy to sort of keep feeding them and not really read their cues. As a feeding professional, part of my job is helping parents learn to read a baby's cues. It's one of the reasons why I wrote Baby Self-Feeding, which is a guidebook that follows the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines for self-feeding and using Smart Start purees to help a baby with this process. So there's nothing wrong with spoon feeding your baby purees. Any negatives associated with purees comes with only spoon feeding. It's with only spoon feeding. Because if you stick to purees for an extended period of time, then that baby can actually develop a feeding disorder. But there's nothing wrong with starting with purees. You just don't want to linger there. If babies continue with purees past the age of 9 months and have not yet introduced Safe Start solids, that represents a feeding delay. So keep up with the purees, but add in the Safe solids, fairly quickly. All right. So from a developmental perspective, purees can be helpful for a baby. They can reduce gagging and they can help mitigate the risk of choking by teaching babies to propel foods backwards, making it easier to swallow safely. All right, good. You guys are doing good here. You got me? A little bit more to add to this. When babies are taught to eat purees the correct way, the tongue learns a purposeful motor movement that helps push food back and teaches babies how to swallow effectively. That's what the introduction of purees does, so that when you move to nice handheld squishables like avocado or oh gosh, a really well steamed baby carrot, it's just going to squish in the palm of their hand and at the roof of their mouth. Well, they've already learned how to propel back the puree pieces. So that's an awesome thing. Here's how it happens. When a child learns to suckle from the breast or the bottle, they form a vacuum around their mouth. This intraoral pressure drives the milk into the baby's mouth and down his throat. Hang on one second. You're going to laugh at me. We are getting a huge snowstorm here in Colorado, and I'm on a roll talking to you about baby self-feeding and purees, and suddenly my space heater kicks in. I totally forgot I had it on. So bear with me, I just had to unplug that. All right, let's get back to how it happens. I was saying that when a child learns to suckle from the breast or bottle, they form a vacuum in their mouth, okay? This intraoral pressure drives the milk into the baby's mouth and right down baby's throat. When a baby is ready to move on to solid foods, he needs to transition from sucking liquids to sucking thickened liquids. Those are called purees. Those are called purees. To squishing self-feeding foods and then propelling those backwards with a combination of these advanced tongue movements and a little bit of intraoral pressure, but not as much intraoral pressure as they would have with breast or bottle feeding. So it's a transitional process. It's a chain of events in learning to eat. All right. Well, so I want you to think about it this way. Purees and finger foods play different roles in your baby's feeding development, and purees truly do have a purpose. So if your baby will take them, purees should be introduced just a little bit ahead of finger foods, or at the same time if you'd like. I like it 3 or 4 days ahead of soft finger foods, just to give them a little bit of a head start, just to prime the pump. And in order to help teach your baby to swallow thickened liquids, think about this as a bridge from breast milk or formula to self-feeding foods. But all babies are different. So some take a little bit longer and some get it right away. Again, if you want to skip purees, it's going to be okay, but know they have a purpose. They really can help your baby learn to chew. So be sure to pay attention to that article I just posted, 4 tips to help baby learn to chew using purees.